diagrams of cells such as this aid us in understanding what cell organelles are supposed to look like. And the organelles are enclosed within membranes and are suspended in the cytoplasm. And the structure of the cell is maintained by its cytoskeleton, which includes microtubules and intermediate filaments. And the nucleus, as we all know, holds the genetic material. So the normal cell would somehow appear like this under the electron microscope to visualize better different organelles. So organization of nuclear DNA. As humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, 46 in total. Chromosomes are thread-like structures containing DNA material. And this DNA is tightly coiled around proteins, which we call histones, that support the DNA structure. In DNA, we have coding regions, which are the exons, and the non-coding regions, which are the introns. The genome. The genome is an organism's complete set of DNA, and it contains all of the information to build and maintain the organism. So the Human Genome Project identified all the genes in the human DNA, and it was completed from 1990 to April 2003. Reviewing DNA, it is the hereditary material in humans and almost all other organisms. It is mostly located in the nucleus, but some are in the mitochondria, and it's made up of four bases: adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. So adenine pairs with thymine and guanine pairs with cytosine. In RNA, we have uracil instead of thymine pairing with adenine. So the human genome contains about 3.2 billion DNA base pairs, but about 1.5% are protein encoding genes. These instruct the assembly of the enzymes, structural elements, and signaling molecules that are used in assembly and maintenance of cells. The remaining 98.5% do not encode proteins, but they provide the architectural planning, and majority of the genes are involved in regulating gene expression. We have major classes of functional non-protein coding sequences in the human genome. So the promoter and enhancer regions, they provide binding sites for transcription factors and binding sites for factors that organize and maintain higher order chromatin structures, um, non-coding regulatory RNAs, such as microRNAs and long non-coding RNAs. These are not translated, but they regulate gene expression, and these two are the best studied mechanisms for gene expression. We also have mobile genetic elements or transposons or jumping genes, which are implicated in gene regulation and chromatin organization, but their functions are not yet well established. And we also have special DNA structural regions such as telomeres and centromeres. And the telomeres are the chromosome ends, while the centromeres are tethers or attachments. So the genome sequencing showed that any two humans are typically more than 99.5% DNA identical. So the individual variation is encoded in less than 0.5% of our DNA. And this would include the differential susceptibility to diseases and environmental stimuli. And the genetic variations, or which we call the polymorphisms, are associated with disease lie within the non-protein coding regions. There are a number of DNA variations, but the two most common forms are SNPs and CNVs. So SNPs are single nucleotide polymorphisms. These are variants at single nucleotide positions. Based on the photo, in SNPs are that one nucleotide that differ in a sequence of nucleotides that are similar among different individuals. And they occur across the genome within exons, introns, intergenic regions, and coding and non-coding regions. And it occurs in 1%, the 1% occurs in the coding regions. So the non-coding regions, they may occur in regulatory elements of the genome, thereby altering gene expression and causing direct influence on disease susceptibility. Some SNPs are neutral variant SNPs, which have no effect on gene function, but they may serve as markers if co-inherited in proximity with a disease-associated polymorphism. The effect of most SNPs on disease susceptibility is weak, but it's still being looked into if these can be used to develop strategies in preventing diseases. The other form of DNA variations are CNVs, which are copy number variations, which consist of different numbers of large contiguous stretches of DNA. They are responsible for 5 to 24 million base pair sequence differences between any two individuals, and 50% involve gene encoding sequences and attribute a large portion of phenotypic diversity. Do note that the alterations in DNA sequence alone cannot explain the variety of phenotypes in human populations. Also, even classic genetic inheritance cannot explain differing phenotypes among monozygotic twins. So this is where epigenetics come in, which are heritable changes in gene expression that are not caused by variations in DNA sequence. To understand epigenetics better, let's discuss histone organization. So first, this structure is called nucleosome, and the nucleosomes have octamers of histone proteins, two each of histone subunits, H2A, H2B, H3, and H4. And these are encircled by 1.47 base pair loops of DNA. And the naked DNA of humans is about 1.8 meters long. So H1 histone, as you can see, is separated. It is located between nucleosomes and it stabilizes the chromatin architecture. The histones are negatively charged, which allows compaction of the positively charged DNA. So the state of DNA unwinding is regulated by histone modification, which include acetylation, methylation, and phosphorylation. So the two basic forms of nuclear chromatin are heterochromatin, which is inactive when they are dense, and euchromatin, which is active when they are dispersed. So histone modification, again, by acetylation, methylation, phosphorylation, they play an important role in epigenetic regulation. So histone methylation. Methylation of histone lysine residues can lead to transcriptional activation or repression, while histone acetylation, lysine residues are acetylated by histone acetyltransferases, and these would tend to open up the chromatin and increase the transcription. These changes can be reversed by histone deacetylases, HDACs, which lead to chromatin condensation. So methylation of particular histone residues condense DNA to silence genes. In histone phosphorylation, the serine residues can be modified by phosphorylation depending on specific residue, and the DNA may be open for transcription or condensed and inactive. So in DNA methylation, DNA methylation can lead to transcriptional inactivation or silencing. In chromatin organizing factors, these are believed to bind to the non-coding regions and control the looping of DNA. So that regulates the space or the distancing between enhancers and promoters that control gene expression. Many diseases are related to inherited or acquired epigenetic alteration. Since epigenetic alterations also regulate gene expression, these are reversible and amenable to treatment. So the previously discussed HDACs and DNA methylation inhibitors are being tested for treatment in cancer. So non-coding regions can also regulate genes, and these genomic sequences are transcribed but not translated. So for a quick review, transcription is the process of copying a segment of DNA to RNA, and translation is the process where the information in the transcribed DNA is used to make proteins. So many other non-encoding RNAs exist, but only these two will be discussed. So microRNA, they do not encode proteins. They modulate translation of target messenger RNAs. So the microRNA genes are transcribed to produce a uh, primary microRNA. So it is processed in the nucleus to form pre-microRNA, and then the pre-microRNA has a hairpin structure. It is exported into the cytoplasm, and then it is trimmed by dicer enzyme to generate mature double-stranded microRNAs. These subsequently unwind, and then these strands would associate with RNA-induced silencing complex or RISC. And base pairing between the microRNA and the target genes silences the gene by preventing translation. So the mRNA may be cut to prevent translation, or the ribosome binding to mRNA is prevented, also leading to silencing. mRNA will not be translated into a protein. So that's why there's gene silencing. So in there's what we call knockdown technology, where there's an experimental setup um, wherein the target genes of interest are knocked down or silenced. So this is where small interfering RNAs come in. These are synthetically produced, and they mimic microRNA, and they are used in that knockdown technology and developed as possible therapeutic agents. Okay, so they are synthetically produced. They translate, but they end up as uh, silencing the gene. That's why they may have a role in therapeutic agents. So now we go to long non-coding RNA. So they modulate gene expression in many ways, and this can bind to chromatin and restrict RNA polymerase from accessing codon genes within a region. So these long non-coding RNAs may play a role by first gene activation. They facilitate the transcription factor binding, and that would promote gene activation. Okay. They can also play a role in gene suppression. They bind the transcription factors to inhibit transcription, so that would lead to gene suppression. The binding of long non-coding RNA can also direct acetylation and methylation, and long non-coding RNAs can also stabilize complexes that already influence chromatin architecture or gene activity. Now we go to gene editing. So technological advancements have led us to uncover the possibility of being able to edit genes. So, gene editing enables us to change an organism's DNA. You can add, remove, or alter particular locations in the genome. So, this is the CRISPR and Cas9 complex. CRISPR is clustered regularly interspersed short palindromic repeats, and Cas9 nuclease. This is a CRISPR-associated gene. Okay. So the CRISPR and Cas9 complex has been initially discovered in bacteria as part of their immune system, which they use to recognize the DNA of their infecting agents. And they incorporate that DNA into their genomes as CRISPRs. Then they make guide RNAs that would direct the Cas9 to the target sites of their infecting agent, and they would cleave that DNA site, and that would end up disabling the infecting agent. So the break in DNA should cause repair, but that repair is error prone, and instead of becoming a repair, it can end up as a mutation that will disable the gene. So in gene editing, this process makes synthetic guide RNAs that would bind Cas9 and look for target DNA. So the ideas of making guide RNA may act like stop codons to stop mutation or replace mutations to repair a gene. So at this point of the lecture, any questions? Wala. So if there are no questions, we can move to the second part of the lecture. For a cell to continue functioning normally and achieve intracellular homeostasis, each cells perform functions that will help maintain their viability. So cells are capable of tasks such as protection, nutrient acquisition, communication, movement, renewal of senescent molecules, catabolism, and energy generation. So the cellular functions are compartmentalized within the organelles and unique intracellular environments to allow efficient functioning of enzymes and pathways despite the various requirements. They coexist within the same cell without compromising other organelle functions. So here's an overview of the organelles in a cell presented by the organelles in hepatocyte. And the brief description for your review are on the roles of each organelle. So to maintain viability and normal activity, we'll look into the functions of the cell components as follows. So the plasma membrane, this serves as a protection, a means of nutrient acquisition, and maintains cell polarity. It is composed of a phospholipid bilayer with hydrophilic heads and hydrophobic tails. The phospholipids vary in location and are symmetric with preferential association with the cytosol or the extracellular environment. So specific phospholipids interact with particular membrane proteins and they modify their distributions and function. So phosphatidylinositol, this serves as an electric scaffold for the intracellular proteins when phosphorylated, and they generate intracellular second signals when hydrolyzed by phospholipase C. This is when it's inside, but they are overly represented on the outside. So phosphatidylserine, this is normally restricted to the inner surface, where it confers a negative charge involved in electrostatic protein interactions. However, when this is seen in the extracellular leaflet, it becomes a potent signal during programmed cell death, such as uh, in apoptosis. In platelets, it is a cofactor in blood clotting. Glycolipids and sphingomyelin are preferentially located outside of the membrane. They support charge-based interactions that contribute to inflammatory cell recruitment and sperm egg fusion. And lipid rafts, these are enriched with glycosphingolipids and cholesterol, and they are areas that enhance interactions with the plasma membrane. So the membrane is liberally studded with a variety of proteins and glycoproteins that are involved in ion and metabolic transport, fluid phase and receptor mediated macromolecular uptake, and interactions between cell to cell, cell to matrix, and cell to ligands. So proteins are associated with the membrane by these arrangements. So proteins are integral or transmembrane proteins. These are often porous or molecular transporters. They can be synthesized in the cytosol, attached to the phenyl groups or fatty acids, and inserted onto the cytosolic side of the of the membrane. They can also be anchored on the extracellular surface by glycosyl phosphatidylinositol, and these are likely to participate in signaling. They can also be non-covalently associated with transmembrane proteins. So the extracellular phase of the plasma membrane is diffusely beaded with carbohydrates that are complex oligosaccharides on glycoproteins and glycolipids, and polysaccharide chains that are attached to integral membrane proteoglycans. So the glycocalyx, this serves as a chemical and mechanical barrier and play a role in cell to cell and cell to matrix interactions by cell signaling. Aside from serving as a protective environment and sites for signal transduction, the plasma membrane allows transfer of molecules with various mechanisms for membrane transport. So in passive membrane diffusion, oxygen, carbohydrates, hydrophobic molecules, polar molecules smaller than 75 Daltons can diffuse easily. They dissolve in the lipid bilayer, making it easy for diffusion. But the membrane is impermeable to ions in passive membrane diffusions. This is due to uh, to their charge and high degree of hydration. Aquaporins, these are proteins that serve as channels in some cells that augment water transport. So here we have mechanisms that regulate membrane transport of low molecular weight species. So we have proteins, type of transport, and water movement. So proteins are transporters. We have channel proteins. These create hydrophilic pores, which allow rapid movement of solutes when um, when they're um, when they're open, and they're usually restricted by size and charge. Carrier proteins, they bind their specific solutes and undergo a series of conformational changes to transfer the ligand across the membrane. So their transport is relatively slow. As a type of transport, passive transport is when the solute movement is driven by an electrical or concentration gradient. In active transport, this requires the use of ATP when the solute moves against a concentration gradient. So an example for this is in multi-drug resistance protein, where it pumps chemotherapeutic drugs out of the cells, resulting to drug resistance of cancer cells. As the water movement, this is movement of water in or out of the cells. This is passive and it is directed by solute concentrations. Okay. So for example, are those cells in intestinal and renal cells? They rely on the solute concentrations by the sodium potassium ATPase pump. So there are three types of movement of solutes across the membranes. You have exocytosis, transcytosis, and endocytosis. So exocytosis, this is when large molecules are exported out of the cell. Usually the vesicle is recycled as part of the plasma membrane. In transcytosis, this is the rapid movement of large volumes of solutes, and the movement is between the apical and basolateral membranes across the epithelial barriers, such as in ingested immunoglobulin in maternal milk. And for endocytosis, this is the uptake of fluids and macromolecules. Specifically for endocytosis, we have the following. So caveolae or little caves are non-coated plasma membrane invaginations. Its major structural protein is caveolin, and these are enriched in glycosphingolipids and cholesterol. So here there is internalization of molecules, receptors, and integrins, and uh, so they play a role in transmembrane signaling and cellular adhesions. When internalization of molecules is accompanied by extracellular fluid, this is called podocytosis or cellular sipping. So endocytosis is denoted as pinocytosis or cellular drinking, depending on the size of the vesicle form. So the invaginated plasma membrane forms a clathrin-coated vesicle, which is pinched off with the help of pinchase dynamine. So the vesicles uncoat and fuse with early desmosomes, which are acidic structures, and the contents are discharged for digestion and uh, passage to lysosome. For receptor-mediated endocytosis, this is a major uptake mechanism for macromolecules, such as in LDL and transferrin, where they bind to receptors in clathrin-coated peats, endocytose into vesicles, and they fuse with lysosomes. And the release of cholesterol and iron happens, but the receptors are then recycled. So phagocytosis is another mode of movement across the membranes. Here, it involves membrane invagination to engulf large particles and is most common in specialized phagocytes such as macrophages and neutrophils. This is non-Clathrin mediated, and this is used for, again, phagocytic cells. So the cytoskeleton, this is formed by intracellular scaffold of proteins and forms the cell's shape, provides movement, and maintain positions of organelles. The major classes of cytoskeletal proteins are actin microfilaments, intermediate filaments, and microtubules. So actin microfilaments, they are polymerized globular protein actin or to form long filament actin. They intertwine to form a double-stranded helix. In muscle, myosins bind to actin and they are seen as banding patterns under light microscopy in cardiac cells and skeletal muscles. In non-muscle cells, the F-actin assembles into well-organized bundles and networks that control cell shape and movement. So intermediate filaments, here we have rope-like fibers that impart tensile strength. The polymerized form do not actively reorganize like actin and microtubules. And nuclear membrane lamins are, they define nuclear shape and regulate transcriptions, and mutations in these can cause diseases such as muscle dystrophy and progeria. So progeria is a disease that involves premature aging, and usually the life expectancy for these are up to about 13 years old. So intermediate filaments have characteristic tissue specific for patterns of expression. These can be used as markers for poorly differentiated tumors. So for laminin, these are for nuclear lamina. Vimentin for mesenchymal cells such as fibroblasts, endothelium, and desmin for muscle cells. Neurofilaments for neurons, glial fibrillary acidic proteins for glial cells, and cytokeratin has several varieties which are present in different cells. So intraepithelial adhesions involve several different surface protein interactions at tight junctions, adherence junctions, and desmosomes. So these various adhesion proteins within the plasma membrane associate with actin microfilaments and intermediate filaments to provide a mechanical matrix for cell structure signaling. So microtubules, these are polymerized dimers of alpha and beta tubulin with positive and negative ends. So the positive ends are embedded in the microtubule in the organizing center near the nucleus, and the negative ends, however. So the positive ends, they elongate or recede in response to stimuli. So microtubules serve as connecting cables for molecular motors, proteins that use ATP to move vesicles, organelles. The kinesins, they move in anterograde transport direction from negative to positive, while dyneins, they move in retrograde transport direction. Microtubules also participate in sister chromatid separation. This is during mitosis, and they have been adapted to form motile cilia in bronchial epithelium or flagella in sperm. So cells also communicate with each other by means of junctional complexes. And these are the basic types. So first we have occluding or tight junctions. These seal adjacent cells and restrict paracellular movement of ions and other molecules. These are the boundary that separates the apical and the basolateral portions of cells and cell polarity. And these are composed of multiple transmembrane proteins such as occludin, claudin, zonulin, and catenin. So here's a schematic diagram for cell connections. So the next are anchoring junctions. Here we have adherence junctions and desmosomes. The anchoring junctions attach cells and their cytoskeletons to the cells or the extracellular matrix. So for desmosome, we have the cell-to-cell attachment, and the transmembrane glycoproteins are cadherins. The same for adherence junctions, the glycoproteins E-cadherin. For hemidesmosomes, these attach the cells to the extracellular matrix, and its glycoproteins are integrins. The focal adhesion molecules are macromolecules that are localized at hemidesmosomes, and they can generate intracellular signals when cells are subjected to increased shear stress, such as in endothelium and cardiac myocytes. For example, in cardiac myocytes in cases of heart failure. So here are the hemidesmosomes, comparing them to desmosomes that part of their attachment is on the extracellular matrix. Then the loss of adherence junction proteins and the E-cadherin would explain this cohesive invasion pattern for some cancers, such as gastric cancer and lobular carcinoma in breast. So, in application to medicine, pathologists would use E-cadherin to in diagnosing these cancers in cases of immunohistochemical stains, which will be discussed along the topics, both in patho and even in clinical diagnosis. So communicating junctions or gap junctions, these allow passage of chemical or electrical signals from one cell to another. And connexons, these are pores within the junctions which permit the passage of small molecules. So the permeability is reduced by intracellular pH or increased intracellular calcium. So here, this is where the gap junctions are located. So they play a role in cell-to-cell communication. For example, in heart muscles, they allow cell-to-cell influxes of calcium to allow coordinated contraction. So let's go to biosynthetic machinery. So here, structural proteins and enzymes of the cell are constantly renewed by ongoing synthesis uh, that are tightly balanced with intracellular degradation. So the endoplasmic reticulum. This is a mesh-like interconnected maze of tubules, and this can be smooth or rough, depending on the presence of ribosomes. It is the site of all transmembrane proteins and lipids for the plasma membrane. It is the initial site of synthesis of all molecules destined for export. And protein modifications occur here, where folding formation of polypeptide complexes and disulfide bonds are done. And chaperone proteins, these assist in folding to retain unmodified proteins until modification is complete. So it's completed when there's already proper conformation of the protein. Improper folding or oligomerization would lead to degradation within the endoplasmic reticulum. And then excessive accumulation of these misfolded proteins would lead to endoplasmic reticulum stress response or unfolded protein response, UPR. So when this happens, when there's failure to correct this, this can lead to apoptosis. An example of a disease is cystic fibrosis. Here there is a mutation in the gene encoding CFTR protein membrane transporter. The CFTR protein, um, this is present in every organ of the body and it produces mucus, such as in the airways, biliary tree, pancreas, GIT, and sweat glands. Normally, this allows chloride to exit the mucus secreting cells. So water follows the chloride ions, which thins out the secretions. In cystic fibrosis, the mutation is the absence of a single amino acid, PHE 508. This leads to misfolding of proteins, ER retention, and degradation. So when this happens, um, this leads to the production of thick viscous mucus instead. So the endoplasmic reticulum, um, this is attached. This is called the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and there are attached ribosomes that translate mRNA into proteins. And for smooth endoplasmic reticulum, smooth ER is sparse in most cells, and they serve as a transition from the rough ER. So they are synthesize steroid hormones or catabolize lipid-soluble molecules such as the liver and the gonads. And intracellular, um, and the smooth ER is responsible for intracellular calcium sequestration. So when these are released in the cytosol, I mean when the intracellular calcium is released in the cytosol, it can mediate responses to extracellular signals like apoptosis. In muscle cells, they have a specialized smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is responsible for calcium release and sequestration that regulate muscle contraction and relaxation. Next, we go to the Golgi apparatus, which consists of stack cisterns that modify proteins and lipids by glycosylation in a cis-to-trans manner. So cis is near the ER, where they can recycle proteins back to the ER, and trans is near the plasma membrane. So this sorts proteins and lipids and dispatches them. These are prominent in cells specialized for secretion, such as intestinal goblet cells, bronchial epithelium, and even plasma cells. So lysosomes, we go to lysosomes. Okay, so at this point, does anyone in class have a question regarding the discussion? For those on site, may questions ba kayo? Na naman. Okay. So before we continue to the next part of the lecture, I would just like to reiterate on some parts that are used in medicine. Okay. So there's a part in the lecture. Wait lang, I'll just get my PowerPoint. So there's a part in the lecture that I think some of you have trances regarding it, yung may mga Vimentin, Desmin, mga ganun, no? I would just like to share that this part is being used in modern day treatment uh, for guiding of treatment in diagnosis of cancers. Okay? Wait lang, hanapin ko lang sa slides natin. Ano ba ito? Naka-screen share na ba sila sa inyo? Di pa. Anyway, the topic is under intermediate filaments. So, dun sa dun sa intermediate filaments kasi, there are terms that are yung mga names ng mga intermediate filaments such as laminin, vimentin, desmin. Nakascreen na kikita nyo na ba? Hindi pa. Okay, wait lang ha. Ito na. So, for those who are on site, I think they can see it na. Sa Zoom, nakikita na ba?
Wala pa po. Wala pa, Dok.
Ito to. Yan, kita na. So, under intermediate filaments, I would just like to expound that these are being used for diagnosis of tumors. Okay, sabi dito, they can be used as markers for poorly differentiated tumors. So, applying these kasi, poorly differentiated tumors, usually under the microscope, they are hard to define kung anong klaseng tumor talaga sila. At most, you can say they are epithelial in origin or uh, they are of like sarcoma-like tumors. But when a poorly differentiated tumor kasi is what you see under the microscope, minsan hindi mo na siya ma-identify kung ano yung pinanggalingan niyang tissue. So this is where the intermediate filaments come in, and some of them are being used as laboratory tests. So for example, you receive a biopsy result na nakalagay poorly differentiated tumor. Usually, the pathologist would suggest another test uh, that would request these. So kung alin dyan yung mag-stain sa tumor natin, this would give a clue kung saan yung source niya. For example, you requested for desmin, neurofilaments, and cytokeratin. So among these three, pag yung cytokeratin lang yung nag-positive, the tumor is most likely an epithelial in origin. So that would guide the surgeons and the pathologists in narrowing down what kind of tumor this is. Okay? Nabanggit din kanina in the lecture yung icadherin. So this is used in gastric tumors and breast cancers. So usually pag meron kang example, benign breast tissue with suspicious areas of invasion. Pwede kasi mag-request ng icadherin pathologist para makita if um, there is loss of expression. If the icadherin is positive, that means intact pa siya. Okay? But if it's negative, that means there's loss of expression. So there's a possibility na may invasion na siya. So hindi na siya benign na breast tissue. It's pointing towards more invasive kind of tissue. Okay? So these are some of the applications bakit natin inaaral to. However, medyo difficult lang siyang i-imagine right now kasi medyo wordy talaga yung chapter. Okay? So let's take a few minutes break para ma-absorb nyo ng konti or uh, uh, makapaghinga lang tayo saglit. Okay? Do you have any questions so far? So let's go. So let's go to waste disposal with lysosomes and proteasomes. So waste disposal for lysosomes, these are membrane-bound organelles containing several acid hydrolases, and they function best at the pH of 5 and below. So there are three pathways by which molecules from catabolism arrive. These are fluid phase pinocytosis or receptor mediated endocytosis, autophagy, these are for senescent organelles, and large natured protein complexes. These are used in during nutrient depletion. And phagocytosis, these are for microorganisms or large fragments of matrix or debris. So in fluid phase pinocytosis or receptor mediated endocytosis, the molecules come from the plasma membrane to the early endosome, to the late endosome, and then to lysosomes, which are progressively acidic. In autophagy, the organelles are surrounded by a membrane from the endoplasmic reticulum, and this fuses with lysosomes. And These are used to preserve cell viability during nutrient depletion or starvation. And in phagocytosis, this occurs primarily in macrophages or neutrophils, and the phagosome fuses with the lysosome. Proteasomes, these are cylindrical structures, and their active sites are in their hollow core. They degrade denatured or misfolded cytosolic proteins into amino acids and are recycled. The proteins for destruction are marked by ubiquitin. Next, we go to cellular metabolism. So here we have the mitochondria. Mitochondria contain their own DNA and they contain a small genome and they are capable of replication, transcription, and translation. And mitochondrial DNA is usually maternally inherited. So mitochondria play a role in generation of energy, uh, anabolic metabolism, and cell death or apoptosis and necrosis. So first we go to energy generation. So the major source of energy that facilitates cell function come from oxidative metabolism. So oxidation of various metabolites drive hydrogen ion pumps that transfer hydrogen from the matrix to the intermembrane space. As hydrogen ions flow back down to their electrochemical gradient, the energy released is used for ATP synthesis. The electron transport chain is not necessarily coupled with ATP generation because it has an inner membrane protein called thermogenin that is used to generate heat. And this is seen in brown fat. So the mitochondria are also a source of reactive oxygen species, um, which are a byproduct of substrate oxidation and electron transport. So reactive oxygen species or ROS were regarded as a host-defending molecule released by neutrophils for destroying exogenous pathogens such as bacteria. ROS can also randomly react with lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, causing oxidative stress and damage to macromolecules. Then ROS can also be produced as a consequence of ionizing radiation, chemotherapeutic drugs, and environmental exposure to transition metals and uh, chemical oxidants. So hypoxia, toxic injury, and mitochondrial aging can lead to high levels of intracellular oxidative stress. So the mitochondria usually have a half-life of 1 to 10 days. Next, we go to intermediate metabolism. Instead of ATP production, the intermediates produced in the Krebs cycle are shunted to form lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. We have this thing we call Warburg effect, wherein in rapidly growing cells, glucose and glutamine uptake is upregulated with decreased ATP production. This can occur in benign or malignant cells. Next, we go to cell death. There are two pathways for cell death, necrosis and apoptosis. And in necrosis, these are caused by toxins, ischemia, trauma damage to the mitochondria. This leads to the formation of mitochondrial permeability transition pore on the outer membrane. And when ATP generation fails, this leads the cell to die. In apoptosis, this is triggered by extrinsic and intrinsic signals For extrinsic signals, example are inflammation and cytokines. For intrinsic example, we have DNA damage and intracellular stress. So this results in mitochondrial outer membrane permeabilization, leading to cytochrome C leaking into the cytosol and activating caspases, which will activate apoptosis. Cell signaling. So communication between cells is critical in multicellular organisms. So cell signaling induces cells to differentiate, proliferate, or uh, direct to perform a specialized functions. So these are classifications of cell signals. First, cells respond to damage to neighboring cells and pathogens, such are foreign invaders. So these are like danger cells. And another signals is when there is contact with neighboring cells, such as in gap junction signaling, contact with extracellular matrix with the use of integrins, and secreted molecules such as growth factors, cytokines, and hormones. So these signaling pathways can be based on distance. So paracrine, the cells here that are affected are those within the immediate vicinity. In autocrine, the molecule secreted by a cell would affect the same cell. So this can be a means to entrain groups of cells undergoing synchronous differentiation during development, or to amplify a response or as feedback inhibition. For synaptic um, signaling, here activated neurons to secrete neurotransmitters into synapse onto their target cells. And for endocrine, the mediator is released in the bloodstream and act on distant target cells. So we also have types of um, receptors based on location. So in intracellular receptors, these are activated by um, lipid soluble ligands that can cross the plasma and the membrane. An example for this is vitamin D and steroid hormones. So in cell surface receptors, here transmembrane proteins with extracellular domains bind with soluble secreted ligands. So when a signal is being conveyed, it is transmitted to a cell by these receptors, and then the signaling molecules will bind their specific receptors and initiate a cascade of intracellular um, intracellular events that will uh, lead to achieving the desired response. So again, these receptors may be located on on the cell surface or within the cell. Next, we go to the types of receptors based on signaling mechanisms and biochemical pathways utilized. So ligand binding to a receptor will mediate signaling by inducing physical changes in the intracellular domain of receptors. So we have receptors that are associated with kinase activity such as insulin, EGF, and PDGF, non-receptor tyrosine kinase, such as immune receptors, integrins. We also have G protein coupled receptors or GPCRs, nuclear receptors, and other receptors such as notched and frizzled receptors. So in this diagram, the RTKs or receptor tyrosine kinases are integral membrane receptors. For non-receptor tyrosine kinase, these are for receptors with no intrinsic catalytic activity. They phosphorylate motifs on receptors or proteins. In GPCR or G protein coupled receptors, these traverse the plasma membrane about 7 times, and after ligand binding, they associate with G protein and subsequently exchange GDP for GTP with the generation of CAMP and inositol phosphate to release calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum. For nuclear receptors, such as in lipid soluble ligands, they diffuse into the cells and they bind to the nuclear DNA. For Notch ligand, these are and of the receptor and nuclear translocation. So the cleave portion will move from the cytosol to so So this is the last part of the discussion. I think it's just a few minutes left. Sorry na disconnect ako. So these are the effects of receptor activation. We have enzyme activation or inactivation, nuclear or cytoplasmic localization, So receptor activation triggers an orderly sequence of biochemical intermediates that ultimately leads to changes in gene expression. So these are the effects of receptor activation. We have enzyme activation or inactivation, nuclear or cytoplasmic localization of transcription factors, transcription factor activation or inactivation, actin polymerization or depolymerization, protein degradation or stabilization, and activation of feedback inhibitory or stimulatory loops. So let's go to transcription factors. So signal transduction pathways ultimately influence cellular function by modulating gene transcription through activation and nuclear localization of transcription factors. So the conformational changes will allow the translocation into the nucleus. And among the transcription factors, Mike and June or MIC and June regulate um, genes that are needed for growth. And TP53, this triggers expression of genes that lead to cell inhibition or growth arrest. Okay, so this is a table from Robbins, tabulation of the different growth factors that are involved in regeneration. So growth factors stimulate the activity of genes required for cell growth and cell division. EGF and TGF alpha, they belong to the epidermal growth factor family and bind to the same receptors. The EGF receptor family has intrinsic tyrosine kinase activity, and EGFR1 and ERB1 mutations, they frequently occur in head and neck and uh, lung CA and breast and even brain cancer. ERB2 or HER2, this is overexpressed in breast cancer and it is used in treatment but as a guide for chemotherapy. We have HGF factor, which is the hepatocyte growth factor. It's also scatter factor and promotes cell migration. For PDGF or platelet-derived growth factor, this is chemotactic. For VEGF or vascular endothelial growth factor, it is the major angiogenic factor after injury in tumors and in tumors. TGF beta or transforming growth factor, these have multiple and opposing effects depending on the tissues and concurrent signals. So the extracellular membrane, this is critical for development, healing, and maintaining normal tissue architecture. Its functions include mechanical support for anchoring and cell migration and maintenance of polarity, control of cell proliferation, this is by binding and displaying growth factors. It also serves as a scaffolding for tissue renewal because normal tissue structure maintenance needs a basement membrane or a stromal scaffold. And if this is disrupted, it could lead to defective tissue regeneration and repair. It also functions to establish tissue microenvironment. And they serve as the boundary between the epithelium and the underlying connective tissue. So the two basic forms of extracellular matrix are the interstitial matrix and the basement membrane. The interstitial matrix is an amorphous gel which is synthesized by mesenchymal cells, and this fills the space between all cells in the connective tissue and parenchymal epithelium. The basement membrane, this is a flat lamellar mesh, and it's organized around the epithelial cells, in endothelial cells, and smooth muscle cells. This is synthesized by mesenchymal cells and the epithelium. The extracellular matrix is composed of fibrous structural proteins that give tensile strength and allow recoil, such as collagens and elastin. It's also composed of water-hydrated gels that allows compressive resistance and lubrication, such as proteoglycans and hyaluronan. And it is also composed of adhesive glycoproteins, which connect the extracellular membrane uh, to one another, such as from cells to cells. And example of these are fibronectin, laminin, and integrin, which were previously mentioned. So we go to collagens. These are composed of three polypeptide chains that are arranged in a rope-like triple helix. The fibrillar type are types 1, 2, 3, and 5. They are seen in bone, tendon, cartilage, blood vessels, and skin and are involved in healing wounds. A defect in these cause uh, osteogenesis imperfecta and some forms of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So the non-fibrillary are types 4 and 7, which are structures of planar basement membranes. Then we have elastin. This gives the ability of tissues to recoil and recover shape, which is important in cardiac valves and large blood vessels, uterus, skin, and ligaments. Morphologically, elastin consists of a central core with mesh-like network of fibrillin. And defects in this fibrillin will lead to skeletal abnormalities and weak aortic walls, such as in Marfan syndrome. So in Marfan syndrome, individuals are tall and thin with disproportionately long arms, legs, fingers, and toes. Next, we have proteoglycans. They form hydrated compressible gels that confer resistance to compressive forces, and they serve as a lubrication in the joint cartilage. They consist of long polysaccharides called glycosaminoglycans, and examples of these are keratan sulfate and chondroitin sulfate, and these are attached to a core protein. These are linked to hyaluronan, which is a long hyaluronic acid polymer, and the highly negative charge pulls or attracts cations in water and produces a viscous gelatin-like matrix. And proteoglycans also serve as a reservoir for growth factors. Next, we have fibronectin. This is a major component of the interstitial cellular matrix. It has domains that bind to distinct extracellular matrix components and provide scaffolding for subsequent deposition and angiogenesis and reepithelialization. Laminin is the most abundant glycoprotein of the basement membrane, and it connects cells to underlying extracellular matrix such as type 4 collagen and heparan sulfate. This can also modulate cell proliferation, differentiation, and motility. Integrins, these are transmembrane heterodimeric glycoproteins that allow cells to attach to the extracellular matrix constituents like laminin and fibronectin. And in leukocytes, they mediate firm adhesion and transmigration across the endothelium. They also play a critical role in platelet aggregation. They can also trigger signaling cascades that will influence cell locomotion, proliferation, shape, and differentiation. For the last part, we have cell population and maintenance. So this involves proliferation and cell cycle, stem cells, and regenerative medicine. The cell population is maintained by cell proliferation, which is important in maintaining a steady state of tissue homeostasis. So the sequence of the cell cycle is as follows. G1 is the pre-synthesis growth. S is the DNA synthesis. G2 is the pre-mitosis growth. M is the mitosis. And G0 state is where quiescent cells are. However, continuously dividing cells, like epithelial cells, they rarely enter the G0 state. So for cell cycle landmarks, this figure shows the cell cycle, and these areas are the checkpoints with the 2 stars. So the G1S monitors the integrity of DNA before irreversibly committing to cellular resources to DNA replication. And then the G2, the second checkpoint, is it ensures accurate genetic replication before the cell actually divides. So let's go to cyclins. The cell cycle is regulated by activators and inhibitors, and this is chaperoned by proteins which we call cyclins, and they are a family of proteins that control the progression. So cyclin-dependent kinase, or CDK, are enzymes that are associated with cyclins. They phosphorylate protein to form complexes and act as surveillance to sense any DNA chromosome damage. So if there's an imperfection, no growth occurs and the cell will grow old or will die. For CDKI inhibitors, these modulate the CDK cyclin complex activity. CDKIs are in charge of the cell cycle checkpoints, and if these are defective, it will allow cells with damaged DNA to still divide. So what happens if there are DNA irregularities? When cells detect DNA irregularities, the checkpoint activation delays the cell cycle progressions and it triggers DNA repair mechanisms. But if the genetic derangement is beyond repair, the cells undergo apoptosis, or they go into senescence, which is a non-replicative state. So senescence, this is through p53 dependent mechanisms. Defective CDKI checkpoint proteins will allow cells with damaged DNA to still divide. This will result in mutated daughter cells that are at risk for malignant transformation. Next, we go to stem cells. Stem cells give rise to all cell types of differentiated tissues and are capable of self-renewal and asymmetric division. Asymmetric division is when one daughter cell differentiates and the other remains undifferentiated, and it retains its self-renewal capacity. While in contrast, symmetric division is when both daughter cells retain the self-renewal capacity. So growth replaces damaged cells and maintains tissue population. And the types of stem cells are embryonic stem cells, which can renew any cell type, and tissue or adult stem cells, which renew only normal tissue. Examples are hematopoietic stem cells. They will replenish blood components. And mesenchymal stem cells will replace stromal cells. So embryonic stem cells, they are the most undifferentiated, and they are seen in the inner cell mass of blastocysts. They have limitless cell renewal capacity and can give rise to every cell in the body. So totipotent cells are, they give rise to all cells of the body, including extraembryonic and placental cells. And pluripotent also give rise to all cells of the body. For multipotent, these give rise to more than one cell type, but are more limited. So the differentiated cells can be derived from the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. So the endoderm gives rise to alveolar cells, the lungs, epithelial lining of the gastrointestinal tract, and respiratory glands. In mesoderm, these give rise to muscles and RBCs, and in ectoderm, skin and neural tissue. So tissue stem cells, these are admixed intimately with differentiated cells and are protected within stem cell niches. And they have a limited range of differentiated cells that they can generate. So cells with low renewal capacity would include cardiac cells and neurons. And the stem cells are located in the basal layer between normal cells, and they remain latent until they are stimulated. Lastly, we go to regenerative medicine. Regenerative medicine is a branch of medicine dealing with development methods to regrow, repair, or replace the damaged or diseased cells, organs, or even tissues. Theoretically, a differentiated progeny of stem cells can be used to repopulate damaged tissues or to construct entire organs for replacement. However, this is limited by difficulty in functional integration into the sites of damage and immunogenicity concerns. So most adult and embryonic stem cells express the human leukocyte antigen or HLA, which provoke the rejection in transplantation. So if the implanted cells are from the same patient, usually there's no rejection. But if the implanted cells are from another person, there is the possibility of rejection. So regenerative medicine, genes can reprogram differentiated cells to become stem cells. So induced pluripotent stem cells are obtained from patients. And usually for these cases, there is no rejection reaction. Okay. So that's my last slide, and this ends the discussion on the chapter. It's quite overwhelming and challenging to read, but please still read your books as the discussion is lifted from there. And feel free to message me if you have any questions. We still have time. We're an hour pa yata. Do any of you have any questions regarding the lecture or any clarifications?
None so far po, Doc.
So, some of your classmates are here. Sige, mag-video on kayo so they can see you naman. The lecture is quite wordy and lengthy, but it's still advisable na you read your books. It's the first chapter in Robbins. If you're using older editions, I think yung 8th edition, they don't have that chapter yet kasi nag-start siya sa